I'm Thomas Mills with Politics NC, and we have the latest edition of Restless Natives NC with Anderson Clayton, chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party, and Travis Fain, political analyst extraordinaire and former longtime political journalist. So, in North Carolina, the biggest thing happening is our filing started. And when filing starts, it's essentially the kickoff of the political year. So, for all intents and purposes, the 2026 cycle has begun in North Carolina. And there have been a wave of filings. You know, most prominently, I saw that Roy Cooper is now officially a candidate for U.S. Senate. And I think Michael Whatley is officially a candidate for the Republican nomination, but he's got a primary. So, Anderson or Travis, you want to tell us a little bit what you think about the filing? And then, Anderson, I'm going to let you talk about what's going on with Democrats and recruitment and that type of thing. All right.
Yeah, the filing's hard to keep up with because it happens over and over again every day. I did not realize Whatley was going to have two Republican challengers. They're not people that I know of. I looked at one of them's Twitter profile, and it was kind of what you might expect from a Republican candidate that you haven't heard of in 2025. So I don't know how serious of a challenge that is, but a primary is a primary, and I'm always inclined to try to treat everybody in a primary as a candidate. I mean, it takes a lot to sign up for that stuff and to run, particularly statewide. So, we'll see. I am kind of interested, we've gerrymandered our way out of competitive congressional seats, partly at the behest of the president and partly just because that's what we do in the United States of America these days is we gerrymander for power, and Republicans have control of the General Assembly. So they're the ones that get to gerrymander for power. But I'm pretty interested in legislative races, and I'll be interested to see if Democrats can do more than just try to break the Republican supermajorities in the House and Senate by one or two seats and really give Governor Stein, give his veto real power and negotiate. And I think that one of the things that has made North Carolina such a strong economy in recent years, over the last decade, is that split control between Republicans and Democrats, forcing them to work together at least a little bit and keeping a fairly stable environment, taking away some of the incentives to chase culture war issues. Because, well, if the governor's just going to veto it and the veto is going to be upheld, it's just, I don't know. I'd be interested to see what Democrats Anderson can do, what sort of goals are reasonable. I've even heard one person say, you know what, they could take one of the chambers. I don't know that I believe that, but I'd be fascinated to see it.
In a year where Republicans are trying to strip away health care again from the 600,000 people in North Carolina that just got access to it and are trying to raise health insurance premiums for everybody across the state, including my public employees who still don't have a budget, I think anything is possible in a year like that. And we're going into 2026, 150 days plus from Republicans actually doing what their jobs are supposed to be in both the state legislature and, in my opinion, in Congress. So I don't know. I'm excited, though. We've had a good filing period so far. Filing deadline ends on the 19th, though. So if you're somebody in one of my rural counties out in North Carolina somewhere that's looking at a county commissioner seat, you still got time to look at it and maybe even run for it. And we're trying to make sure that we recruit not just state legislative races, but also looking down ballot at our sheriff races and our county commissioner races that are going to be up too. And I'm really excited by the type of people that we've seen step up to run, especially for us in competitive state legislative districts. So you're looking at, and I think I've talked about her honestly on here before, but Amy Taylor North is going to be running again against Jeff Singer out there in our Forsyth County district. And I think that what I look at as a state party chair is that there's a lot of ground that we still have left to give in my major metropolitan areas in North Carolina for state legislative districts. And that includes places like Wake County, Forsyth County, Mecklenburg County, where you're looking at a Tricia Cotham district, where we're going to have people like Kim McCool, who's one of our younger elected officials out of Navtives that's been on their city council there. He was one of the youngest elected officials ever elected in North Carolina state history before, who's going to be running against her this year. And I think it's just going to be an interesting field to watch grow, and also the good quality and caliber of candidates that we have. April Cook is going to be running in our Senate district in our Cabarrus County seat out there. And it's going to be an interesting opportunity, I think, to see the effort and I think the energy that these candidates are going to bring to it. But we're looking at a good filing period so far. We're also looking at some interesting primaries, and it's really wild to me. And Thomas and Travis, I don't know if you want to touch on this a little bit about how many Republicans we've seen say, I'm peacing out of here, actually, and I'm not going to be running for reelection. Like Julia Howard was like, oh, I've been in here for like 36 years. I maybe need to take my leave. And then you've also got our Rowan County representative that said, I'd rather go run for clerk of court or whatnot, too. And I think we've seen a
Harry
few more.
Warren is you're talking about there with the clerk of court.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting to see that too happen because I think, and Thomas, maybe you can speak on this, at least from what I have heard from folks, like the mass exodus of Republicans that are leaving Congress right now or that are going to be retiring this year is sort of an indication about the year that we're going to have or that they're looking at for them. And then also, I think we could see that same thing at a state legislative level too. And some of these races, it's the first good time that we're going to have an opportunity to really have competitive, at least in some sense, of gerrymandered races because we'll have open seats for the first time.
I think Julia Howard, by the way, did file for re-election, though, not to be too much of a stickler there, but I think she's running again. I saw Brian Anderson say that on Twitter, I believe.
I read that she is.
But she is 81 years old, and she has been crossways with leadership in the past, particularly under former Speaker of the House Tim Moore. She criticized him in some manner and had her committee chairmanship stripped. Got at least some of it back. Obviously I'm not in on the ins and outs of the House Republican caucus, but she's been someone who has pushed back against leadership and is the longest serving, I believe, member of the North Carolina General Assembly.
Well, the one that we haven't really touched on is the big one. Phil Berger. We talked about it in the past, but Phil Berger's primary with Sam Page, the sheriff down there, is real. And, the thing that's been interesting to me is to watch Phil Berger really bend over for Donald Trump. I mean, for a guy who is president pro tem of the damn North Carolina Senate, one of the most powerful people, to debase himself like he's doing. And I guess it's his social media people, but they just are slobbering over how much he's for Trump. And I guess he's waiting for the Trump endorsement. Did the Trump endorsement actually come, or he's waiting for the Trump endorsement? But, he's a guy who should have some integrity, and he's really embarrassing himself. I mean, it's at some point, don't you have to have, after that much time and that much power, don't you have to have some sense of pride? Or do you just sell it all out to a guy in the White House? I don't really get that.
Phil Berger is arguably the most consequential Republican or even just elected official period in North Carolina the last 20 years. I mean, he is hugely important. He has been hugely successful. He has helped remake the state's political and government landscape in favor of Republican policies. The fact that he feels like obviously the president's endorsement, if it comes for either candidate in that race, is going to be huge. It may, in fact, be decisive. That is a sad commentary, I think, on the state of the Republican Party writ large. Because statewide in North Carolina, Republicans should be thanking Phil Berger just about every day, I would think. Now, how his local people, because obviously what matters in a race is what does your district think about you. That's between him and the people of Rockingham County. I got no opinion on that. I there's going to be a flip at some point. And if I had to guess, I'd put it somewhere around November of 2026, where Republicans no longer feel like the smartest thing for them to do politically is to bow to Donald Trump. But it's going to take someone in D.C., like a J.D. Vance, for example, to decide, okay, now's the time to stab Caesar in the back. Like, eventually that's going to happen, right? Like, I don't think that's a particularly controversial thing for me to speculate on.
It's not controversial, but I would have thought it would have happened by now. I mean, right now, this guy's really dragging those people down, and they're still hanging on to him. And it's kind of interesting to watch where, the Gallup had him underwater by 24 points. And that's enough to really sink the GOP. I mean, if he's underwater by 24 points in September, October next year, there are going to be states in play for the U.S. Senate that are not right now. And that's, you would start to think people would be trying to distance themselves, but they're not. But, one thing that is happening over there in that Whatley race, and I think Whatley comes out of it, but they there's a lot of division. Apparently, Steve Bannon went on his radio show or a podcast and said that Michael Watley is not MAGA and that Republicans in North Carolina are not excited about him. And I don't know if that's enough to sink him in a primary where he's probably going to really dominate the media, but it could be enough to turn off some of the MAGA folks when at a time when the GOP is going to be suffering turnout problems anyhow.
He's not MAGA when he's got Trump's endorsement, though, right?
I, you
Every
know,
time I hear Steve Bannon's name, I think, isn't he in prison for fraud?
I mean, actively, I'm like, okay. And like Trump's handpicked, which is why he's going to clear a primary field. And I honestly, to God, think he is not representative of the base of people, of Republicans in North Carolina right now who feel like that Trump handpicked this person to be the next U.S. Senate candidate from North Carolina for
well,
them, you know?
yeah, I think the problem with Watley is I think Bannon's basically right. He's not really MAGA. Michael Watley is whatever you want him to be. He was pretty standard fare Republican, Reagan Republican guy until all of a sudden he wasn't. Now he's MAGA. And so, the problem that I think the division that you're seeing within the Republican Party right now is those people that were not MAGA, that were anti-MAGA almost, and then all of a sudden became MAGA. The other person that Bannon bashed in that same podcast was Lindsey Graham. Lindsey was the same guy. He was out there bashing Trump throughout the 2015, 2016, and then all of a sudden he's Trump's best friend. I
The
still
difference
think
in
Trump
that,
has something on that guy,
Michael
but
Watley's never bashed Donald Trump. In fact,
no, he
signed
hasn't.
up like
No.
that, and that's where I'm like, you could in some sense, right, say that he was never, but I'm like, no, actually every single one of his actions to me proves that he has always been. It is just how far was a Republican Party willing to allow somebody like that to go? And right now we have seen it at the White House, and Michael Watley's pushed it just as far. I don't think there is any difference in what is sitting in the White House right now versus what's running for U.S. Senate in North Carolina on the Republican ticket.
Well, I think you're giving Michael Watley way more credit than he deserves. He never pushed anything.
That's
That's a guy who's been dragged along. He's not, and
You know
that,
what, Thomas? You could say that, or you could think of it like he's also the person that was the got handpicked to be chief counsel to the RNC before he became the RNC chair. That was during Trump's first term in office, right? And he happily signed up to leave to leave North Carolina. Well, I guess this is his second or going into their second or into Biden's term, I guess, in the first sense, because it was after I think it's really interesting, his entire trajectory, and I'm sort of like, he's never denounced once, like, the extremism of a right-wing side of his party. In fact, he's only embraced it, right?
I just don't think I don't think the guy's anything. I think he's a bunch of clay. He's whatever the Republicans want him to be. If Donald Trump had lost the primary in 2016, he would have been whatever the Republicans were. He would have been a traditional Reagan Republican today. Donald Trump won, so he's Donald Trump. This is the whole problem with the Republican Party. They have no core values anymore. They have become a party that is nothing more than whatever the guy in the White House tells them to be. And MAGA senses that, because the problem that Republicans have with MAGA is they aren't Republicans. I get beat up by MAGA pretty frequently on Twitter, and the number of people who have in their Twitter profile not Democrat, not Republican, not Democrat, MAGA is huge. Those people aren't going to come out and vote for a guy like Michael Watley. They're going to sit it out. And that's what their challenge is going to be. How do we get people who don't see themselves as Republicans coming out to vote for a guy that they don't really see as MAGA? So that's
I mean,
my,
at some
my take.
point, the Trump coalition falls apart unless somebody can keep it together, right? Unless a JD Vance or someone can keep it together. But I would like to make just a broader point about how we all live our lives. There's a Kurt Vonnegut book called Mother Night. And he says in the introduction that it's the only book that he wrote that he knows the moral of. And the moral, he said, is we are what we pretend to be. So we must be careful what we pretend to be. And I think, look, in politics, there's this incredible pressure to do and say things that you think will get you elected, will advance you with your peers, will, will help you amass power. And at some point, though, if those are not truly held beliefs, if you don't have truly held beliefs, it does eventually collapse in on you. And I think we're going to see that in real time over the next few years in our.
Well, I think it's ugly. On the flip side of that, I think for everything we just discussed about Michael Whatley, I think Roy Cooper has a good shot at taking this seat. I mean, it's not going to be. Look, one thing I'm going to say is anybody who thinks that this is going to be an easy race doesn't understand North Carolina politics. Cooper may win, and I think he's the favorite right now, but it is going to be a hard fought battle, and you're going to have to see Democrats coming out at large levels, which is what we're seeing in these special elections across the country. We're seeing surge in Democratic vote. In Tennessee the other night, it was 11 points. And the thing that I found interesting on Twitter is all these Democrats arguing about whether it could have been more or not.
Thomas, we gotta get you off Twitter.
What's that?
As someone that loves Twitter, we might have to get you off of it.
Well, to me, it's hilarious to watch them argue about it. It's like, who cares? The argument is, well, we had other candidates. It was, plus 25. And it's like, I don't really care. Plus 25, plus 11, plus whatever. We right now are in position as Democrats to have a good year because of surge voting. And that's good. That's a positive thing. To me, what I'm looking at is it's really shaping up to look more like 2018 than say 2022. In 2018, if we had had a Senate race, I've said this before, if we had had a Senate race on top of the ticket, we would have a Democrat in the U.S. Senate right now. We didn't have a Senate race, but we did break the veto-proof majority and picked up some Supreme Court seats and that type of thing. So, we're in a position to have a good year, but we can't rest on our laurels. It's going to be a tough fight.
And you can go to ncdp.org and sign up to volunteer anytime that you would like to. If you've listened to this and it's either frightened you or it's made you really excited to get involved. I do think we're going to have to work as hard as we've ever worked to win an election, both for Roy Cooper, but also my Supreme Court Justice candidate, Anita Earls, and all three of my Court of Appeals candidates, including Judge Toby Hampson and Judge John Arrowwood. And you're going to have a primary in March, everybody, for that third seat. So go ahead and look up your candidates now and who's going to be on your ballot.
Races are so important, and I hope people are seeing that as all the courts have been a check on the president, maybe not as often as some people would wish, but it's so important to have good, smart, honest judges, and it can be hard to kind of learn about that. I wrote a story back when I was at WRAL about like how should you vet judicial candidates, like how should you decide your vote? And we have partisan judicial races, so if you want a D, you can pick a D. If you want an R, you can pick an R. But the number one piece of advice that floated up was ask your lawyer friends. If you know lawyers, ask them who you should vote for judge, particularly in the local races. I know Anderson has been talking about statewide races, which are hugely important, obviously. But the lawyers know who the good judges are, or who they think might have the right tenor to be a judge. So, that's the advice that bubbled up out of that piece. And I talked to 25 people for it. So,
well, the other thing about these judges that Anderson says are so important is, I believe that the Supreme Court of North Carolina is corrupt. And I would not have said that a year ago. But after watching what they did in the 2024 election, where they voted to change the rules after the fact, I don't believe there's any way you can really justify that. The Trump-appointed federal judge basically said the same thing. This is unjustifiable. And yet, there was no sense of remorse. They would do it again. And that's not what our judges are supposed to be. The judicial branch should, to some degree, be the referee in these races. And that's not how they see themselves anymore. They see themselves as partisans. And I used to know a lot of judges, appeals court judges and Supreme Court judges, they saw themselves as neutral. Republicans and Democrats, they saw themselves as kind of arbiters. There would be some things that would come down to some sort of partisanship, but for the most part, they tried to be fair. And now there's not even, I don't even think there's a veneer of being fair. It's we're going to score some points. Phil Berger Jr. and Paul Newby, they're not the people that we should have on a Supreme Court. So electing Anita Earls is incredibly important because if she gets elected, we have a chance in 2028 to really flip the court, and that's where we need to be.
Y'all don't even need me on here anymore. Look at that. Thomas is basically saying my 3-step plan for me. I'm like, and honestly, that's what we want. Everybody stop, step, and repeat. Do it again and go tell 5 more people.
Well, I learned well, Anderson. You've taught me well. Thank you.
No, that actually made me want to cry. Literally, when people go up there and they repeat that back to me, I'm like, we've done our jobs. Like, in some ways, that to me is the effectiveness of being like, hey, we're going to tell everybody. Now, what I need us nationally to do is do that with every state and be like, okay, what does this look like everywhere to actually win back or take dim majorities or at least like have a lever of power in it? And I think that would be a very neat thing to be able to have as a party nationally.
Yeah. Well,
I'd love to see. I'm very interested in how the national level, the Democratic Party evolves over the next 6 months. I mean, just in the immediate future, like who kind of rises up as the true leaders of that party, who are the front runners in 2028? Because, I mean, the Democratic Party it's not enough to have a positive
Deep
environment.
sigh, Travis, before
It's
you
not enough
continue that sentence.
I mean, I don't know what to tell you. No, well, no.
No,
But
you know what? 135 Democratic flips from red to blue on Tuesday and 650 wins. Out of that, 29 of those are new young Democrats that are out there that are stepping up into the party. I'm like, we've got to keep recruiting like newer faces and I say young as in those were below the age of 35, but I mean also young as in the below the age of 50 into the Democratic Party right now too. It's all of a priority, but I get it. I think that like a lot of people though are like, it's missing a vision forward. And I'm like, no. We have it. I promise. The young folks on the ground are here. And at least within the local places. And that's where I'm like, nationally, I think it does look a little bit interesting right now. But even then, I still feel like we have a lot of young people running for federal offices this year. And just like a different generation of party voices that are coming to the forefront a little bit more. It's interesting, like an infrastructure perspective, though, I think. And maybe that's what you're talking about.
I kind of want to hear more about the infrastructure.
No, I think that's where I'm like, that's what I'm interested to see what changes. Like how did campaigns adapt in like 26 and 28 to sort of the technology side of what we're seeing right now. And I think that North Carolina has had so many good examples of it happening to people, right? Where you've been doxxed online, both nationally by sort of this right wing base in so much sense and like how national or local issues have become national out of the state. And I think we're going to deal with a lot more of. And something that I'm interested in is because I've always felt like as an organizer, you could make things as long as you just spoke to local issues. That is honestly what won elections. And I think it's really interesting because right now I feel like that's being flipped on its head in so many ways. There's a lot of national issues or what are calling people out to vote in every election, whether that be local or statewide. And we saw that on Tuesday, in my opinion, too, from November.
And obviously this is happening as social media continues to morph, as AI becomes more. I mean, this will truly be an AI dominant election cycle coming up. And it will ultimately probably manifest itself in that people just don't believe anything. That is a pretty easy default to hit when you start to think you can't. I work for a bit, do some outside consulting for the North Carolina Alliance for Safe Transportation. We're exactly what you sound like. We want you to wear your seatbelt. Seatbelts work. Don't text and drive. And there's a bill, the hands-free NC law, which would it would make it illegal to drive around with a cell phone in your hand. It makes it easier for law enforcement to enforce that. And there was a Facebook post that we don't know who put it out that said, hey, that's law. That became law December 1st. And it got quite a bit of attention. A couple media groups picked it up. It was from a Facebook page that said North Carolina legislature. It was not an official page. We don't know who put it out there. But then Google's AI because it looked like an official source pulled it. And if you Googled anything about North Carolina hands-free for several days there, it told you that was the law right at the top of Google. And that is going to be, for a little while, how a lot of people get information. And then that's going to flip unless the AI people can figure out a way to be accurate almost all the time. That's going to flip, I think, to I don't believe anything. And that's my concern, is that we go through this short period where people believe disinformation widely because of AI, and then they stop believing all information. So that's
Well,
that's my
or they
current
just get
dystopia fear.
Or they do get better at, like and I think about it for my generation, right? Like, my mom's generation never fact checked anything. If she read something, she thought it was a fact, right? Because, like, the internet, she didn't grow up with it. And I'm like, I grew up with the internet. And so I always looked at, like, you have to double check your sources. And you were taught that in school. And I think now people are it's going to be the internet is not a trusted source altogether. You
Right.
actually need to be verifying your information. And the younger generations that are coming up right now will grow up knowing that because they grew up with like AI, artificial intelligence, and the type of technology that we are pacing towards now, right? But people that are my generation and before, or like older than me, I'm like, I don't know how you're going to be able to necessarily tell people that or train people to understand that unless it's going to be like trial by error, which is the same thing I think that we see with like fraud and development and like people getting spam text messages now, right? And they start to believe them, and that we've got to have our attorney general out there talking about how toll road spams are happening to people's phones because it's an education game that I think we have not caught up with yet, just in general, to be honest with you.
Well, and when it's, especially when there's money involved, there needs to be pretty quick accountability against the bad actors, which, not to just immediately pivot back to Trump, but boy, what a banner year this has been for people committing white collar crimes who want pardons for the president of the United
I
States.
saw today 1,000 pardons. Maybe it was 2,000 pardons.
Every one of them, I'm sure, well vetted.
Yeah. and everybody pushing that partisan well compensated.
Well, and who was the guy that got a pardon and then immediately he has been now charged with a new fraud, like a Ponzi scheme? Trump pardons him, and then now he does another, doing more fraud. I mean, that used to be the kind of thing where even the hint of that might happen was a killer for a politician, and now it's just open. We're simultaneously attacking small boats coming out of Venezuela because they are presumably carrying drugs, while the president is also pardoning the former president of Honduras, who, was a part and parcel of a massive narcotics smuggling ring.
That brought 400 pounds of
Cocaine, I believe.
cocaine into the United States.
Yeah, and it just, when people see the lack of accountability, things fall apart real fast.
Yeah,
We
it's
definitely don't have an administration or, in my sense, too, at every level, accountability for our government right now. And I think that that is a big problem of people's trust within it.
So, Anderson, where have you been? Have you gone, seen anybody, met anybody, seen any interesting places? You're the person on this podcast who gets out of their basement.
I don't know. That depends on who you ask these days, I guess. Hey, you know what? I got to go. I was in Orange County recently. I was out in Rowan County, so I've been in Salisbury recently, but Orange County, I got to sit down and have dinner with our fantastic former Congressman David Price. And
Great.
that was really wonderful, I think, for the history lesson on Goodwin House, because to be truthful, Goodwin House is going to need some good little renovations to it to be done. It's a historic house and it's on the historic registry. And David Price was telling me about what they used to do to be able to fundraise for Goodwin House. And I thought it was just a nice life lesson, because I was like, wow, I've not really sat down with him and asked him these questions about when he used to be. For those of you that don't know, our former congressman was also our former state party chair. And so he had at one point in time, really, I think, transformed sort of the staffing measures of the party. And I got to tell him we've got 25 full-time staff now. And he looked at me and he said, year round? And I was like, mm-hmm. And he goes, oh, we never did that in my day. And I was like,
No.
well, it was a different time for a state party back then too. But it was fun to talk to him and I think hear from him. Yeah.
We move on pretty quickly in politics and in life, and just kind of people go out of the public eye and we kind of forget them. There's just all this wisdom that is out there when you look to the previous generation. I mean, we could probably sit here and come up with 20 people that we don't hear from all that often, but who probably have a lot to contribute to politics specifically.
Surfacing those folks this year and last year. I think that's been the fun part about having a lot of people that value, honestly, a lot of young people that are looking for mentors in the party right now and that value institutional leadership and then and that knowledge, because I think it has been a really cool thing to be able to see across the state from just an intergenerational perspective. I see it happening. I think that maybe highlighting that more. Somebody told me this week that we needed to do a better job of talking about and highlighting sort of what my local county parties are doing more often in their communities. And I think next year what we're going to try to do, we're going to do a college tour in that first semester and going around the state, but also trying to really go around to my county parties that are doing like the food bank drives right now, and really putting like a service oriented mentality on what does it mean to be a Democrat, because it's it's something that's happening. It's just people aren't seeing it online, so they don't think that it is. And going back to your point, Travis, about how like things are changing, I think it's got to be way more of like how do we show our, and this sounds bad, but like how do we pat ourselves on the back a little bit more? Like how do we showcase what we're doing more in a way that's like advertising more? Because I think we're missing that. People think that we're not doing something when it's like, no, we are, but it's not reaching you in the way we need it to right now. You know?
The image of perhaps, let's say, the oldest county party chair and the youngest county party chair together, or the youngest elected official and the oldest retired official who's like the image of those two together working would be really powerful. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, think about having a video of that on the internet. So I think like the party's got a lot more. I'm excited. 2026 for us is going to be a little bit about, I'm hoping, experimenting. Like we're trying to innovate a little bit in our state party, and we're going to be coming out with a new website soon. We've got some new videos that we're going to launch. We've got sort of a new, and we're trying to do that for our candidates too. So I don't know. I think it's going to be good. And I know that I'm a little bit probably behind where I need to be, but also it's like we got to start somewhere, always.
Yep, every day. Every day you do a little bit every day, and eventually you get accomplish things.
So, Travis, are you reading or watching anything that we ought to be looking at?
I will highlight a story from Taylor Knopf, who is with NC Health News, and she did a piece out of Richmond County, I think, where she questioned why some of the opioid settlement money was not flowing to a really popular, kind of successful anti-opioid group, a group that helps people with drug addictions. And a lot of it was the infighting that you might expect in whatever county. But it made me think, so often things pass a settlement, multi-billion-dollar opioid settlement, where we're getting money to fight addiction from the pharmaceutical companies and the others who pushed opioids on people for so many years. There's billions of dollars nationally. I can't remember the figure in North Carolina. It's a big number, and it's split up by counties. Sheriffs are involved. The Attorney General's office is involved, and there is oversight over this. But what a great thing to watchdog, right? Like how the money is flowing, who it's flowing to. It's the end of the year, and everybody's looking in some ways for ways to fill their time, because journalism just never stops. But in December, things kind of slow down. So I think that's just Taylor does a good job. NC Health News. Anybody who's listening to this who doesn't read NC Health News, that's a nonprofit news source that covers health policy and goings on, and could use your donations, quite frankly, because I mean it ain't easy to start up a niche journalism publication that's at the state level. But that's what Rose Hope and her team have done over there, and it's part of the journalistic fabric here. So yeah, watchdog that money and go to NC Health News.
Yeah,
It
they're
was
great.
1.4 billion, Travis. I had to
Is that statewide? Is that just the state number?
it's just the state number. 1.4 billion is how much the Attorney General's office under Josh Stein got back for people in an opioid settlement. And what I thought was cool was one thing that we advertised just like as a party when that happened was that the Department of Justice in North Carolina actually made a website called DOJ Delivers, and you can go look up by county how much opioid settlement money your county got back. So if you're in North Carolina somewhere and you want to know right now, you heard Travis just talk about it and you're like, yeah, where the hell did my money go? Go find out. jdelivers.com. You still find it.
Good
There you
stuff.
go.
All right. Well, I'm going to finish up with a little bit of a rant.
Also .gov. I'm sorry, everybody. dojdelivers.gov. Don't ever listen to me again. But dojdelivers.gov. Sorry,
Always
Travis.
listen to Anderson. Don't
Can't
listen to
trust
Anderson
anything on
telling
the
you not.
internet.
Always listen to Anderson. She'll correct herself if she's wrong. Anyhow, you know, We've touched on it a little bit, but what's going on with these boats in the Caribbean has really bothered me on a whole lot of different levels. For one thing, we're not at war. These are not combatants. These are people leaving mainly out of Venezuela and Colombia. They're not coming to the United States. Some of the drugs may filter in here, but they're going to the Dominican Republic and some other islands like that. And with no due process, we're blowing these people out of the water. It turns out that the very first strike, they blew up and there were 2 survivors. They did what they're now calling a double tap strike, where they then went in and murdered those 2 guys. That's a war crime. The problem is we're not at war. So that's just outright murder. And the administration's whole story has just shifted from first denying it ever happened to now saying, sure, it happened and it's okay. But, this to me is reminiscent of the whole way this administration's worked. It always happens like this. First, they deny it. And then over a series of lies, they come to owning it and saying, not only do we own it, it was the right thing to do. We did this awful thing. In this case, we literally killed 2 men. And they know they were wrong because about 2 weeks later, they blew up a boat and they sent the survivors home. They didn't do that because they all of a sudden had compassion for the survivors. They did that because somebody said, you guys are going to jail. In World War II, there were several incidents where Japanese machine gun Americans in the water and were held liable as it was considered a war crime. In Germany, they machine gunned some, I think they were Dutch sailors in the Mediterranean, and they hung 3 Germans right after the war for murder. And if we're gonna present ourselves as a country that has any sort of moral standing, we need to hold the people accountable who did this. The one thing that I'm getting is when Hillary Clinton talked about a basket full of deplorables, she told the truth because they are now in the administration. There are people killing innocent people is deplorable. There are people like Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel, who they're grifters, Pam Bondi, Christy Nome. These are bad people, and they're running our government. And this is why we have to win as Democrats. Not because we're in some sort of normal time. We have to win because we have people who are literally committing evil acts in the name of the United States. The pardoning of criminals, the killing of people off the coast, the grift that is just incredible that we're watching. The other article that never got the attention that it should have gotten was a Wall Street Journal article where that Steve Witkoff and Ivanka's husband, what's his name?
Kushner?
Yeah, Kushner. They basically went to Russia and sold out the Ukraine in order for business deals. So our foreign policy is about making the Trump family money instead of protecting countries that are on the brink of an invasion or have been invaded by the Russians. And we're losing the respect of the Europeans. We're losing the respect of the Canadians. We're losing the respect of the good guys in the world as much as they're good guys. And we're wasting our credibility as a moral force, and it's not going to take a few years. It's not going to take one administration to get it back. It's going to take decades. And we watched it happen really over the course of 9 months. I mean, at least in the first Trump administration, there were some guardrails and there were some people holding him accountable. But ever since he's been in office this time, there's been nothing. And they are as bad as anything we said they would be. And the real problem here is it's almost less about the Trump administration. It's that the Republican Party has stuck with them, and there's nobody in Congress who holds them accountable. They've given up their role as oversight. They've surrendered to the deplorables who run the country right now. And that's what's so scary. And we might not be able to topple the Trump administration in 2026, but we can certainly take control of Congress and start holding people accountable. So go out and work because we've got to stop what's happening right now. The damage they've done is going to take decades to undo. Let's not let them continue to do it. That's my rant. Anybody got anything else?
Amen. And just to say that it's not just Donald Trump's family, it's Christine Ohms, too, who are getting $220 million from DHS ads that they've made and the video shoots that they've done to make her look like she's out there playing Call of Duty herself. So, I mean, you know, there's a lot right now going on. And to be able, I think, to say that there's corruption in our government at every single level. And also, to your point, Thomas, just throughout that entire administration. But especially if you care about, you know, being fiscally conservative, you think that, you know, the things that are wrong right now are actually wrong. I think that there is a much better way to fix them than what's happening at this moment in time currently,
Yeah.
and what this administration's done.
And the complicity is really disturbing. So you can have a vote for any Democrat and have a clear conscience, because Republicans right now have none. All right. On that one,
Sitting up between us being like, okay, guys.
I would just encourage people to inform yourself and vote. Inform yourself and vote. It's as simple as that. Follow your conscience, inform yourself and vote.
thank you. All right. I'm Thomas Mills, and I'm signing off for Politics and